Welcome to Workshop 5 on Human Development. Now, you might be asking yourself, why on earth, in a course on congregational spiritual formation, we're going to spend an entire week talking about human development and looking at the ideas from a couple of guys who are social science theorists. Well, just maybe we can gain a little bit of insight into how to better create environments for congregational spiritual formation based on what we learned from some of these guys. Now, the Bible is a form of revelation. We know that God reveals himself and his desires for us in his word. Things like Deuteronomy 6, which helps provide an insight for us into how spiritual formation should take place in the home. Deuteronomy 6 offers things like to make an impression, a God-shaped impression on the hearts of your children, you should do things like talk about him when you wake up, when you walk along the road, when you sit at the table, when you go to bed at night. Put the words of God all around your house, on your door frames, and on your foreheads, everywhere they look, everywhere you see. Deuteronomy 6 gives us some insight into that spiritual formation, how it happens in the home. There are other verses like Hebrews that you studied last week. What did you learn about God's desire for congregational spiritual formation last week in the study of Hebrews? Well, he told us that he doesn't want us to remain as spiritual infants. He wants us to go on. He doesn't want us to just be spiritual milk drinkers and focus on elementary teachers. Rather, he calls us to move forward, move on in our perfection. He wants greater things for us. He has deeper and richer things for us. There are other numerous places in Scripture that provide a glimpse into spiritual formation as well. Matthew 5 in the account on the Sermon on the Mount, Romans 12, 2 Corinthians 3, Ephesians 2, Philippians 4, all of these provide some type of an insight into what God expects for us in terms of spiritual formation, personal and congregational, and there are many, many more throughout the Scripture. Of course, the life of Jesus itself offers a beautiful example of what God's expectations are for us. He is our living example of how we are to live and how we are to grow in our relationship with God. His words, his actions, his attitudes, and of course his many, many teachings. One of the teachings in his words that he provided, he said, summed up the whole of the law into one verse, one sentence, one thought, one command. It's kind of this whole summation. If you could say what congregational spiritual formation's goal, outcome should be in one verse, this is it. It's the Great Commandment. And what does he say in that to us? In Luke, the Great Commandment reads like this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. God reveals himself, his desire for us and our spiritual formation in his word. He also reveals himself in his creation. Reveals himself in his creation. And we can learn something about his desire for us when we study the creation. I read a book recently where the author suggested that anything that science discovers about creation offers a new insight about God, because God is the author of creation. If we believe that all truth is God's truth, then when truth is truly discovered, now of course scientific theory isn't always truth, but when truth is discovered, it cannot discredit what we know about God. It can only enhance what we know about God. The social sciences study creation, and several theorists, based on the study of creation, have come up with different schematics on how humans develop. These theories offer insight into the general ways it has been observed that people develop cognitively, socially, emotionally, and morally. What they have discovered about how we develop can only serve to illumine what we know about God's expectations based on his word. For example, we were talking earlier about Deuteronomy 6 and the ways that God revealed specifically through Moses talking to the people. These are the things that I expect you to do in your home so that your children will have faith, so that spiritual formation happens in the home. Talk about me when you wake up, when you walk along the road, when you eat at the table, when you lie down. But it doesn't tell us how to talk about him. So in other words, say I have a 2-year-old in my home. Would I talk about him at the table in the same way as I do with my 15-year-old or my 25-year-old or my 70-year-old grandparents? Is that the same way that we talk about God? No. And human development offers additional insights to enhance what we know God has already called us to. See in theology what we learn about God from Scripture and His expectations for us in light of developmental theory, and the insights it offers into the way humans acquire knowledge and grows, gives us a much richer backdrop in our development of congregational spiritual formation, in a strategy that will move our people along the journey of faith that God intends in a way that is reasonable for them. If we believe, as John Wesley suggested, that all of our people are capable of developing great faith, even our youngest children, then we owe it to them to have an insight into how they develop, because how they develop, what we know about that, impacts the way we teach them, the way we create environments so they can learn. Remember last week we talked about learning results in cognitive, affective, and behavioral changes. If we want those kind of changes to happen in the lives of all of our people spiritually, spiritual change that way for all of our people, then the study of human development might give us a few insights into how we need to create environments and cultures that can really occur. As you read this week, Blevins and Maddox and Ackerman in the chapters that you've been assigned in there, both texts talk about four developmental theorists primarily: Piaget, Kohlberg, Erikson, and Fowler. As you read about them in those texts, I want you to begin to ask yourself, so what? So what in terms of spiritual formation? What impact does their work have on my expectations for congregational spiritual formation? How I'm going to design programs and how I'm going to implement practices. How are we going to do that in a way that will really capitalize on our people's learning expectations? If it is true, as Piaget suggests, for example, that we acquire knowledge through assimilation and accommodation, what impact will that have on how we structure our learning environments? Or if, as Fowler suggests, faith develops on a fairly predictable trajectory, then what should our expectations be on how a high school student can engage spiritual conversations as opposed to a 6-year-old, as opposed to a 60-year-old? After you have read and researched and acquired some new insights into human development, I want you to begin to reflect on how those insights that you've learned impact your thinking about how you've been doing congregational spiritual formation and how you can do it in order to leverage far more potential for learning outcomes, greater learning outcomes in the lives of your people. I have 3 questions I'd like you guys to focus on this week. First of all, do we behave as if we believe we are called to greater things, as Hebrews suggests? Second of all, do we behave as if we believe all of our people, regardless of their age, are capable of great faith? Finally, is your environment conducive to your people growing, regardless of their developmental stage? Have you made adjustments to reflect the insights on human development? I'm anxious to hear your responses to those questions. I'm anxious to see how you take in your groups what you've learned about human development and make practical spiritual formation application. See you on Blackboard.